Hey, all you Tier Talk fans, plus my Keepers of Chaos out there. Russ Hamilton here. Anyway, I decided it'd been a while since I'd done a dedicated video on my own and thought I'd leap right into it. So I decided that I wanted to do something that I thought would really help you out on a day-to-day basis. So what I've got basically is this: critical thinking skills. Okay, so why are critical thinking skills important? All right, so I'm going to give you three primary reasons why we need to develop these. All right. The first one is that critical thinking skills give us an edge in preempting critical incidents. Number two, it increases the safety and security of the institution. And number three, it's going to save lives. Okay. So if you've been around corrections enough, there's some of you that probably heard of something that we do to try and prepare ourselves better on a day-to-day basis that we call the what if game. All right. And the what if game is really simple. What if this happens? What am I going to do? What if this other thing happens? What am I going to do then? All right. And so the what if game is very closely related to these critical thinking skills that I was telling you about. But what if I told you that chances are you probably haven't been playing the right kind of what if game? All right. And what I mean by that is simply this, right? Most of the time when people are playing the what if game, because they're the, typical officer, maybe new to the job, don't have a lot of experience in, pretty much what you're doing is you're playing what if, and you're playing it on the tactical level. All right. Now there's nothing wrong with that per se, except that what you're doing is basically you're addressing things that are already in motion. They're already things that you know about that are happening. You're thinking about, if, that little group of inmates over there, the Bloods, approaches the Crips, what am I going to do? What if they start fighting? Then what am I going to do? And you develop your list of these actions that you're going to take. And what that does is it helps you pre-plan for an event, right? And so that's really important, especially when you're first starting out and you may not have a real good grasp on what your particular, disturbance control plan or alarm response plan is. Having said that really is at the tactical level. And that is not primarily what I'm talking about when I'm thinking about critical thinking skills, right? What we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about thinking skills that are not at the tactical level, but they're at the strategic level. And the things that we're going to use in order to, make our facility safer, that we're going to try and give us that edge in getting ahead and preempting a critical incident. So instead of just, merely responding to it, we're going to stop it before it has the chance to get started. And that's a little bit of the difference between strategy and tactics. Tactics, you can kind of think about as something that's already in motion. Tactics are basically the exact way that you deal with something rather than the broader outlook of, a more comprehensive view where you can actually, prevent things from occurring. So that is the reason that these skills are so essential in corrections and why they actually may save a life. Might be yours, might be your partner's, might be an inmate's out there. All right. We have a lot of different lives that we're responsible for, and this can help you do all that. So anyway, when I was trying to come up with, ways back in the day to try and get these ideas across to people, I was essentially, trying to come up with some different exercises, some skill building things. And, when you're talking to groups of people and doing classes and stuff, you're always looking for a way to really illustrate to people so they get it and they're able to take it back to their institution and pass it on to other people. And so what I came up with was this, right? And it was a little bit of, a language scenario where I just got them to pay attention a little bit too much to some of the words that I was using. And I came up with a scenario for them to address. And this scenario really worked out well because it really started illustrating, the difference between addressing something on that tactical level and addressing something on that strategic level. Even though in this particular scenario, you're going to kind of see how the two sort of mesh. But anyway, the scenario is basically this. is I told everybody, basically you're in your housing unit, you're doing a search or some type of cell inspection, and you go into a cell and you're looking under the bed and you pull a box out and you find an inmate manufactured grappling hook and about 30 to 40 feet of inmate manufactured rope from some sheets. How are you going to deal with processing this, which could be a crime scene? And how are you going to deal with the inmates that are assigned to this particular cell? And so anyway, people say, they started, chiming in, and they said, well, I'd have someone go over and get the camera. All right. That's a good idea because, do possibly have a crime scene here, it could be an escape. And, someone else said, well, you know what? I'd send some search and escort guys out to bring those guys in off of the yard and handcuff them up and start processing them and getting them ready to go to SEG. And, there's just several different good little ideas, coming in on this thing and stuff. And so then I kind of said, okay, so let's stop for a minute. And all of those things are good. But when we're talking about critical thinking skills, we're not talking about the things usually that are obvious. What we're doing is we're trying to do what? We're trying to imagine, we're trying to comprehend the worst probable things that could be occurring right at that moment in time. The things that, we're too busy, looking at the surface of what's occurred here, and it's stopping us from seeing perhaps that deeper game. All right. So I then started, okay, this is what I would do. All right. The first thing that I would do is I would do a complete recall of the yard. And now, of course, in all of that too, I'd go ahead and, lock that cell off because, yeah, we are going to have to process that, right? We're going to get all the inmates back into their cells. We're going to take these two inmates that come back, assuming they arrive, into custody and start doing, get them ready to go to SEG or whatever. But then we're also going to have to do all these other things. We're going to have to notify local law enforcement because what don't we know at this point? We don't know if we actually have an escape. We've saw escape paraphernalia. Maybe they had more. Maybe this was some that they couldn't use. Maybe this plan is already in effect. Maybe this plan is being effected right now. We got to get that outside patrol sergeant rolling around this perimeter. We got to stop all traffic in and out of the institution. We got to start taking things into account because this may have already happened. All right. So this is a situation where you get those blinders on. You start making assumptions about what's true and what isn't. And kind of some of the assumptions that they made in this was whether or not these inmates were still even here, about whether or not this was the only escape paraphernalia in the whole institution. Maybe, maybe not. We don't know what's going on yet. And so this is the way you begin to approach critical thinking, right? Starting to be able to no longer look at your own assumptions and take them as valid, but being able to look beyond those assumptions and being able to imagine what the bad probabilities are. All right. So in the course of developing this idea for beginning you guys down the path of critical thinking skills, Anthony and I were actually doing a completely different subject. It was a little bit of manipulation. It was a little bit of personal responsibility. And basically what it was, there was a scenario that Anthony had brought out in a video that we were doing. And he started talking about, well, what if an officer had lost his keys and, he's like looking frantically for him. And then a minute or two later, an inmate comes up and hands him the keys and says, hey, it's cool, boss. I got you. All right. So if you look at the surface of that, if we're looking just at the tactical part, what are we saying? We're saying, oh, cool. Heart rate goes back down. Blood pressure goes back down. Realize how bad I almost screwed up. And one of the things that we were looking at from the manipulation point was, of course, now what do? We kind of owe that inmate a little bit. All right. But when he brought this scenario up to me, I thought, man, this is it. This is a great training scenario for teaching critical thinking skills. And so I went on to adopt it and to use it because there's so many different bad things that you can think about here that I can't even begin to list them all. All right. The first one of which, this inmate, how long did he have those keys? All right. Did he have time to go maybe make a wax impression for possibly a later escape attempt or something? We don't know, right? What else could he have done? He could have got access to a lot of places where he could have got who knows what, something for making weapons, maybe weapons themselves, maybe uniforms. Maybe he was able actually to get to a place where he could access a way to escape. All right. Do we know how many people were with him at that moment in time? No, we sure don't. So this is the point at which we need to start taking into account how we need to act in our strategic manner because we do not know what's going on. We can't act tactically, all right, because tactically kind of assumes a little bit that we know sort of what the situation is, all right. What are the situations we could be facing here? We could be facing an escape. So we have to keep that inmate in custody, right? We have to start getting ready to do a count. We have to start, doing a preventative patrol around the area. We might have to go ahead and we might have to notify outside law enforcement. What else might we have to do? All right. Do we know for sure that every one of our staff members is safe? No, we don't. We got to start taking that into accountability. And you begin to see how the evolution of this starts to take place when you're doing critical thinking. This is a new kind of thinking. It goes beyond the simple what if of that tactical that I mentioned, and it bumps it up into a region where we're thinking strategically and we're getting ready to use that strategic thinking to do what? To act decisively. Because now there's a whole lot of things that we might have to prevent, preempt, and stop in all manner of fashions. Everything from out there, armed patrols. We might have to, start partnering with law enforcement. We might have to form up a med team. There might be hurt staff members there. There might be hostages already taken. You see what I mean? How this begins to, wind out of control over what we don't know. All right. So we have to take what we don't know and eventually at some point turn it into what we do know. We turn it into what we do know by getting that count done, by doing our staff accountability, by trying to determine, which doors these keys went to. We try and determine whether or not did he have a chance to make a wax mold of them or not. Are we going to have to replace those locks? Probably something we can't deal with at that particular moment. So anyway, that last scenario kind of gave you an idea about just how far this chain can unwind, about all the assumptions that we shouldn't be making in those situations that we don't know about. So I'm going to leave you with one last little scenario and then talk about a couple things just real shortly. And again, just to emphasize how important critical thinking skills are, right? But I had an instance, hot day, right? And we had a vehicle sally port out there. The nice thing about this particular vehicle sally port is that we had overhead armed coverage over it because, we took, lifers and everything out through it. So it was nice to have, a rifle up there above us and stuff. And I had an officer on his way in and they had opened the sally port for him and he had rolled the car in there. And it being a hot day and everything, he thought that he would be, extra nice to that inmate that was inside there, right? Left his door open, left the engine running so that the AC could, hit that inmate back there and he would be nice and comfortable. The problem is this particular officer did not bother to think about what? The bad probabilities, right? Now, fortunately that day, absolutely nothing happened. However, I had to school this guy a little bit on what those bad possibilities could be to wake him up to the fact that he needed to be using those critical thinking skills. He needed to be thinking about what he was doing. Yes, we have overhead lethal force right there. Do we want to use that? No, because somebody's probably going to lose their job in a situation like this. But what could have happened? What possibly could have happened? Do you think that inmate, he could have, rolled over on his back and kicked a window out? Maybe managed to slip his cuffs around in front. Maybe he had on waist chains, so, at least he could reach up underneath the steering wheel and move it a little bit. Do you think he could have used it as a battering ram to maybe possibly get out? That's kind of a little bit doubtful. Pretty stout gates, but you don't know. But then what has to happen? He's possibly escaping. You've got armed coverage there. You've got lethal force. Then you got to use lethal force. You think that's not going to be some kind of a hassle, some kind of horrible civil liability? Yeah, it is. Is it going to make your department look like a bunch of jackasses? Yes, it's going to do all of those things. But this is why we do this. This is why we talk about critical thinking skills. This is why I have to have you imagine, what are the bad things that can happen? If I give an inmate X, Y, and Z, what are the worst things he can do with them? Are they likely? Are they possible? Are they probable? Probable is really where we usually have to worry about. But still, sometimes we have to worry about just what might be possible too, depending on the inmate and what those circumstances are. So last thing, I want to give you 3 things that critical thinking skills bias. All right. So the 3 main things that critical thinking skills really provide us with are this. It lets us mitigate our assumptions, right? And assumptions are horrible because we're assuming that we know what the facts are when we really have no idea. We tend to try and act on those assumptions, and that buys us a whole lot of trouble. So that is probably the number one, the primary, and that's why I've listed it as number one thing that critical thinking skills do for us. This is why we need to develop them. The second thing is it allows us to develop plans for future operations and responses. All right. If we can imagine something bad happening in a certain location under a certain set of circumstances or any set of circumstances, what can we do? We can pre-plan. That's right. We can pre-plan for that bad event so that it never gets too far out of hand, or that we can put ourselves into a position where we can stop it before it gets started. All right. And so what does that help do? What's that last third thing that I said at the very beginning of this? Saving lives. I mean, saving lives is the ultimate thing that we can possibly do if we can, be so good in our game, in our ability to play that strategic, what if game, to be able to mitigate all this stuff away, to really be true critical thinkers. All right. And third, it gives us a key to inhibit complacency. All right. Now, complacency is something that I've talked about in a lot of other videos and stuff, but let's just talk about it here real quick. All right. Complacency. All right. What is it? Situational awareness, perceived, but not achieved. All right. That perception is what? It's an assumption. All right. We're assuming that we have situational awareness when we really don't. That's really what complacency is. So anyway, I hope that this has done something to really, kind of invigorate you and make you want to, start examining what the bad probabilities are in order to try and stop them at your institution, in order to try and be that thinking professional correctional officer that really has true game and can really be an impact player with regards to safety and security. Anyway, this is Russ Hamilton, and I'm signing off. Everyone, stay safe.